It's been a while since I last visited Regensburg, my beautiful old hometown in Germany. My parents still live here, but I left many years ago for a life in Canada. When I was little, I didn't even know where Canada was. But to me, it seemed like a very special place because my dad spoke about it. Not very often, but always with great fondness and respect.
Everl, kennst du noch das Denkmal?
Ah. Vati.
Ja, so ist es. Kannst du dich noch erinnern an dieses Denkmal?
Ja, als Kind bin ich da immer so bei.
Like all young German men, my dad was drafted into the army shortly after high school.
Ja, es ist geschmückt mit Blumen und so weiter.
But luckily, Dad was soon captured by the British and shipped off to Canada. He spent 3 years in a prisoner of war camp in Lethbridge, Alberta, not far from where I now live with my family.
Kanada eine faire Gewahrsamsmacht, die sich an die Punkte des Roten Kreuzes und an die Genfer Konvention gehalten hat. Und man hat uns das Leben nicht schwerer gemacht, als es ohnehin für einen Kriegsgefangenen schon ist.
My dad, Theo Melzer, was sent to war in 1942, 2.5 years after the Second World War had started. By that time, Nazi Germany had seized most of Europe and was pushing eastward into Russia. Dad was sent to the southern front to join General Rommel's Africa Corps, only to be captured a year later by the British Allies and become POW 260-267. War ravaged Britain. Unable to accommodate these thousands of German prisoners, appealed to Canada, where space and food was plentiful. Ultimately, more than 38,000 German soldiers ended up behind Canadian barbed wire.
Es hätte jedes Lager einen großen Aufstand erproben können, denn das Wachpersonal war nie in ausreichender Menge da. Aber das ist uns eigentlich gar nicht in den Kopf gegangen.
Warum nicht?
Erstens mal, weil wir uns als Gefangene gefühlt haben und dann, weil es uns auch nicht schlecht gegangen ist. Diese Entscheidung, zum Afrika-Korps zu gehen, die hat man im Nachhinein sehr gut geheißen, dass alles so gegangen ist und die Möglichkeit, den Krieg zu überleben, die war als Afrikasoldat viel größer als für einen Soldat, der im Osten eingesetzt war.
Oh, Tante Carmen.
Hi, Eva, grüß dich Gott. Es ist schön, dich zu sehen.
Dad thought I should hear my Uncle Rolf's story. Uncle Rolf was 19 when he was sent to fight on the Eastern Front. He too became a prisoner of war, but in the Soviet Union, where living conditions were bad enough for their own people, but even worse for enemy captives.
Interessiert und ich habe da eben gestern mit dem Vati drüber gesprochen und jetzt würde ich ganz gerne wissen, wie es denn bei dir war, Onkel Rolf.
Ja, bei mir war es lang nicht so schön wie beim Theo.
Theo hat die Gelegenheit gehabt, in Kanada sich weiterzubilden, nicht schulisch und ich weiß nicht, was er alles...
Kurse auf allen Gebieten.
Kurse auf allen Gebieten. Und in Russland, da gab es nur Arbeit.
Ja, die haben es nur ausgenützt. Ne?
Ja.
Da haben wir täglich 40 bis 50 Tote gehabt. Und als früh ist immer die Ärztin gekommen, eine russische, hat immer gefragt, Skoigo, Kamerad kaputt, also wie viele Kameraden sind tot? Da haben wir gesagt, also 45. Da hat sie gesagt, Pacimo malo, warum so wenig? Ne? Das Einzige, die ganze Gefangenschaft, war mein einziges Sinnen und Trachten. Du musst wieder heimkommen. Und das hat mich so bestärkt. Und ich habe an nichts anderes mehr gedacht. Und das habe ich das Ziel gehabt, nur gesund bleiben und nach Hause kommen. Und nun habe ich alles so gut überstanden. Und war von Haus zum Glück gut genährt gewesen. Und dann habe ich das überleben können. Denn, wie gesagt, die anderen, Sind alle weggeblieben. Naja.
Uncle Rolf told me that 1.1 million, more than 1/3 of the German soldiers captured by the Soviets, died in captivity there. My dad remembers only a few deaths of German POWs in Canadian camps, which were mostly due to failed escapes, medical problems, or suicide. Three weeks after I got home to Canada, I received a parcel from my dad. In it were 124 letters he had written from the POW camp in Lethbridge to his family in Regensburg. They were numbered and lovingly preserved by his mom, my grandmother. I had no idea that they even existed.
15. August 1943.
August 15th, 1943. My dear parents, dear little sister, surely it must be terribly sad for you to know that I've been captured, but I'm certain it won't be long before I'm back home again. It may be comforting for you to know that a humane enemy took us in, and treatment and food are good. The camp is huge and the barracks are divided. I went to Lethbridge looking for Dad's camp, but today little is left. Few people even know about this site or any of the 25 German POW camps across Canada. The Germans in the camps were treated with amazing fairness. After the war, many ex-POWs returned to make Canada their new home. Like Hans Pfeffel, who immigrated in 1955 and settled just a few miles from where the Lethbridge camp once stood.
I was very short in Hitler Youth because you were kind of forced to. Otherwise, you were outsider. They were already trained into military, like we learned how to read a compass and how to read a map and some kind of war games. Well, I was drafted to the German army in March 41. I was 20 years old. And I was transferred to the Africa Regiment 361. In the end of October, Montgomery started the offensive, you know. And I don't know, I just read it up. There was hundreds of guns when he started. It went the whole night, it went boom, 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 boom. We had to retreat.
We are here. That was the plane
Yes.
where our cabins were standing.
Yeah.
Johannes Liebewirt lives half of the year in Germany, but spends every summer here at his cabin on Lake of the Woods, Ontario, where he once was held in a small POW lumber camp.
I was 18 years old, just after high school. So we had a chance either to go to Russia, to the war, or to North Africa. Most of my comments went to Russia because they said, well, close, we make it within a short time. And we said, well, we are more adventurous guys, you know. So Africa with palm trees, maybe apes, camels, whatever, Arabs. And we made it there. We were fighting and we were thinking we win, and all of a sudden it was over.
I drove to Winnipeg to meet Eric Hase, who immigrated to Canada in 1953 and has never since returned to Germany.
Well, I was 20, exactly 20. I got my papers for military training. Well, we got on the way, but on the second night, we were torpedoed. And unfortunately, I had the mouth open. I swallowed diesel oil. Well, anyway, after a while, we swam around there, and the moon was shining, and in the moonlight, I saw the next ship, the Oceania. And I cried to the guys, "Oh, let's swim over there to Oceania." Ne? And when we were halfway to that ship got a torpedo and sank. Well, I was fished out. But before we could stage our attack on Tobruk, we were attacked in the back from the British 8th Army that had gone south through the desert.
Siegfried Osterwald left Germany in 1955 and settled in Edmonton, not far from my house.
Well, I finished high school at the age of 18 in 1937. And I wanted to go to university, but I had to serve in the army for 2.5 years. And when that time was over, that would be in the fall of 1939, this is exactly when the war started. So, of course, they kept me right there. And since that kind of spoiled my intention to go to university, I wasn't very pleased with that war at all.
In uns marschiert Deutschland und hinter uns kommt Deutschland!
The idea that Germany could be defeated was just not there. And it definitely wouldn't have been popular if anybody would have said something like that. So I went into all these situations maybe with a lot of naivety. I thought, oh, nothing can happen to me. We will win the war eventually, and I have to go through this, and I will survive. Of course I will survive. And even if when I was lying in a hole in the ground and all the artillery things were banging here and there and everywhere, I never thought that I could be wounded or even die. No, I was just lying there, and when all the show was over, I got up. The Tommy came and told me to raise my hands. I didn't even know what happened to me. I never thought about becoming a prisoner. At that time, I just raised my hands and I thought, well, will they feed me? What will they do with me now? Will they shoot me or will they... I don't know. I just didn't know.
Well, of course, I was very depressed, you know. And my first thought came, I won't see my homeland for a long time.
The average soldier is not very happy when he becomes a prisoner of war. Neither was I, of course. I spent 5 months in Egypt in a camp, and then I was shipped all around the globe from Suez, Cape Town, west coast of South America, Panama Canal to New York.
And there was CPR, Canadian Pacific Railway. In front of them were the veteran guards, end of 50s, 60s, like our fathers.
Then we were put on a train, and since the food on the ship had not been very good, we felt this cannot be, we are on the wrong train, because there was a meal served with dessert and everything.
We didn't really believe it. And I think in that train, that was the first night we really slept comfortable with a full stomach.
And then we drove from there, night, day, day and night, day and night, night and day. We didn't know where the hell do we go.
Initially, prisoners of war were housed at existing remote sites, a fort on Illinois, a boys' reform school in Bowmanville, a paper mill in Espanola. Officers were held in separate, less crowded camps, like the vacant sanatorium in Gravenhurst. The most western side was a temporary tent camp in Osada, at the foot of the Rocky Mountains.
When we came from Africa, they play die kleine Nachtmusik. We had coffee and they gave us a knödel and goulash. And we thought, well, at the time we thought we have found the paradise.
The idyllic impression was deceiving. In many camps, a small group of hardcore Hitler devotees tried to reinforce strict Nazi discipline and reminded the newcomers of their oath to the Führer.
Kameraden, niemals vergessen, dass ihr stets Kämpfer sein müsst. Kämpfer, auch in Gefangenschaft.
There we were greeted by prisoners who were captured already in 1940, 41, mostly Navy and Air Force officers. We came, we Africans, with a bundle on our shoulder, looked a little shabby, and there was already a kind of a, there was a difference between a career officer and those who just served because they had to.
This is a watercolor of the town of Rotenburg, Oktober in Bavaria. It was done by one of the prisoners in the Wainwright prison camp.
Leo Hampson was 19 when he enlisted in the Canadian military. He fought in Europe for 3 years before returning to Canada to replace the old World War I veterans guarding the German POWs.
When the prisoners were first captured, they were, of course, always interrogated. And but under the Geneva Convention, all they're required to divulge was their name, rank, and number. And but the Germans were interrogated to find out what their political views were, and they were segregated into different groups depending upon their degree of fanaticism, let's say, for being the Nazi cause. And the ones who were very ardent Nazis were classified as blacks, and then the less ardent ones were the Greys, and then the ones who were almost anti-Nazi were the Whites.
Meine lieben Eltern, liebe Schwester.
My dear parents, dear little sister. Based on my rank, I'm allowed to write 2 letters with 24 lines and 4 cards with 7 lines every month. Now, nothing can prevent us from corresponding regularly between Regensburg and Canada. You need to know that all of our mail will be censored by both the Canadian and the German authorities. Don't worry about me. I'm safe and healthy. As the war progressed and more soldiers were captured, larger camps were needed. In Lethbridge and Medicine Hat, huge identical camps were built, each holding more than 12,500 men.
The layout was just about identical to the Canadian military camps. This was not a provision of the Geneva Convention that they should be housed in similar or equivalent circumstances to our own troops. And the major difference, of course, was the barbed wire around it. And there was a double stockade, and anybody who approached that wire was in danger of being challenged or even being shot by one of the guards from the guard towers.
German POWs were housed, fed, and received mail in accordance with the Geneva Convention, the international agreement on the treatment of war prisoners. Under the convention, POWs were allowed to wear their own uniforms, keep their medals, and display military regalia. The prisoners kept their German uniforms as neat as they could. Otherwise, they had to wear the official blue POW uniform with a red circle on the back, a target for the guards.
The Veterans Guards of Canada were a corps of World War I veterans who were deemed to be too old for service in the Second World War, but yet they're still physically fit. They were given the task of guarding the prisoner of war camps.
For us, we simply had to consider them the enemy according to the general policy, we were even supposed to do as much damage to the enemy as possible. Now, there were some people who tried to do this by escape. Some people got together, they dug a tunnel, and that didn't work out. The tunnel was discovered outside, and they were just waiting outside until the tunnel was finished so they could pick them up the way they came out.
It's their job to try to escape. And a lot of them really didn't get very far. They got into the cornfields, and we would chase them and capture them. But it's a hard country to escape. One chap, I have a picture there of him, got as far as Pincher Creek, and still in his German uniform.
There were over 600 reported escape attempts. The largest took place in Angler, Ontario, where 28 Germans escaped in honor of Hitler's birthday.
Many people, they didn't even know about certain attempts because it was even inside the camp, it was kept kind of a secret. And we also, most of them didn't know where our secret radio was.
Well, this radio was taken by a group who were ordered to clean the cabin of the camp leader there, the colonel, and they took the interior of it. So they left the shell only there. So they bought and put it together in the camp and were hiding it behind in a library, behind the books, you know. So the veterans never found it. They could accept the radio from Germany and the news, so they knew what was going on. And every evening there was a news conference. Somebody was standing in front of the cabin of our huts and reading the reports from Germany. We are advancing, we are winning, and that was a country at this time already. And all the losses they had and how many ships were sank and all those stuff. Never telling the truth.
Oh yeah, there were fanatics where you have to keep your mouth shut. You could not say, well, Hitler, the son of a bitch or something. This was out, you know. I mean, even losing the war, you couldn't say this.
Some Nazi groups were very active in the camp, I must tell. And they pretended to be the best in the camp and to make the order there. Sometimes it was so you better, sometimes you have to shut your mouth.
One POW who did not keep his mouth shut was Carl Lehman, a professor of philosophy and linguistics. In his classroom, he translated war news from Canadian papers and openly questioned Hitler's leadership.
There were some lynch justice cases by Nazis who killed their comrades. That was transmitted by this hidden radio we had in the camp. And then the Nazis listened to it, and the order was given from Germany, everybody who is a traitor will be killed, has to be killed. So they followed the order, I would say.
And we got down to the end of where the classrooms were, and one of the German prisoners was hung up in his classroom against the gas pipe. So we cut him down. And this was learned later to be Dr. Carl Lehman. It was a method of scaring the hell out of the other prisoners for behave yourself, in other words, or the same thing will happen to you.
As fellow POWs were afraid to cooperate, the investigation was difficult. Only at the end of the war did the RCMP discover the 4 POWs responsible for the murder. They were convicted under Canadian law and hanged. convinced to the very end of the honor of their deed.
We gotta realize that Hitler had the propaganda in his hand. And he wrote in his book, I can lead 80% of the people wherever I want to, if I have the propaganda in his book, in his hand. And this is true. And many of these people in the camp, they were brainwashed.
You can't have a war unless you demonize the enemy. And I can remember even taking part in that myself, you know, and in fact we used to make up posters. I used to put these posters up in the barracks and in the mess halls. And there was one poster there had a silhouette of a German soldier with a square helmet on and the rifle pointing right at the viewer. And underneath was a sign that said, killed him before he kills you.
Ein Kamerad, der mit uns aus Afrika kam.
One comrade with an injury from Africa died following complications. He was put to rest with full military honors. Our Reichsflag covered his coffin, and a real rifle salute was fired. Our German camp leader spoke a respectful eulogy, while all other comrades, dressed in their best military uniform, stood at attention.
We were German soldiers. We had to keep some kind of discipline as soldiers. And the Canadians, they expected a degree of military discipline from us. We greeted the Canadian officers, for example, and things like that. There was orderly march to the roll calls and things like that. For us, it was natural to keep that up to a certain degree.
We had our own Lagerführer, that means camp leader, who negotiated with the Canadian, whatever it was, to negotiate about. May it be things for the canteen or something like this, you know. All these benefits, they were negotiated only between our camp leader and the Canadian administration outside.
And these camps, of course, were being inspected regularly by the what they call a protecting power. And in this case, it was Switzerland. And so the Swiss consul came and inspected the camp. And the Swiss people were inspecting the camps in Germany, and they would be sending reports back to their respective governments as to how their prisoners were being treated. So they had to be quite careful as how they treated prisoners, because they knew that it could be retaliation.
To show the Nazi government how well German POWs were being treated, the Canadian government commissioned the National Film Board to create a film. As both Germany and Canada were signatories to the Geneva Convention, Canada hoped that this film would remind Germany of its obligations towards Canadian prisoners. And indeed, Germany did treat Canadian POWs relatively well, at least in the early years of the war.
Canadian prisoners of war, they talked about their privations of the food was poor, and that the barracks were very cold, of course, but the whole civilian population was suffering the same way, so they'd never complained about it, and none of them spoke about any mistreatment by the Germans to the extent that the convention had been breached in any way.
Of the 8,000 Canadian POWs in Germany, 380 died. In comparison, of the 5.7 million Russian POWs whose country had not signed the Geneva Convention, 3.3 million died while in German captivity. Prisoners of war in Canada received mail and parcels through the International Red Cross. while the YMCA supplied them with various recreational and educational material.
I was studying law there, others medicine and engineering and bookkeeping, all kinds of professions we had to learn. And the University of Saskatchewan was our tutorship university.
When I came home, it really helped me a lot. I could jump right away into the last semester of the technical school in Hamburg, and I passed with flying colors. I don't want to brag about it, but that's the way it happened, and only because I used the time to study in a prisoner of war camp. We had a symphony orchestra led by a teacher of conductor school in Berlin who was also captured in North Africa. And he chased these guys around. They got tired of trying again and trying again. But when they played the Symphony of Beethoven, for Pete's sake, that was excellent, and you couldn't hear it better where I come from.
We had a big theater group, all kinds of big performances, and we had choirs and lots of films. Every week we had 2 films, mostly from Hollywood, you know. We saw all the beautiful girls on the screen, but only on the screen.
Mein liebes kleines
My
Schwesterchen.
dear little sister, I still remember you as my little sister, as I experienced your last 3 birthdays only from far away. Thank you, Carmen, for your lovely picture, which I shall show to some close friends. I'm amazed how you now look like a real Fräulein. For your 18th birthday, I wish you much happiness, and most of all now, a good husband. Your big brother, Theo.
The life in a camp was not physical. We had everything we need. But what was the worst is, you know, the doing nothing or waiting. When does the end come? When does we come home? That was the things which hurts the most.
With time, their initial arrogance faded. Trust started to develop between Sherman prisoners and Canadian guards. At some remote camps, cooperative POWs were even allowed to walk outside the barbed wire, just on their word of honor.
I noticed all these prisoners lining up that were waiting to go outside. And as they went past, they had to sign a parole. And the parole is something like, I hereby declare on my honor as a German officer that I will not try to escape. I will stay within the prescribed area. I will not go near the railway or talk to any civilians, and I will return by, I think it was something like 4:30 in the afternoon. And they signed that parole, and off they go. And not one ever broke that parole.
From this camp in Wainwright, we could walk about 50 minutes to the former Buffalo area. I went out to that Buffalo area park, and on a clipboard, just by pacing, I marked down all the hills and ponds, and then from that, I prepared a map of that area.
As the war continued, more and more Canadian men went overseas to fight. By 1943, the labor shortage in Canada had become so severe, the government offered trustworthy POWs the opportunity to work for a little money outside their camps.
The camp was out, about 1.5 miles north of our place, and I remember going down there with my dad and picking up several of these men and taking them back home to help with the work on the farm. Because of the war, there wasn't a lot of help on the farms. And a lot of it was really hard work. You know, there were sugar beets, and you hoed them, and you thinned them, and you topped them by hand. You know, you scooped them into the back of the trucks by hand, and they filled a real need on the farms. And I think the farmers were very grateful to have this extra help.
Always took one end of the field. You couldn't see the other end. It was beyond the horizon. And we took all day and day. But the farmers worked, they liked our work. They brought us to eat and drink, yeah. It was a good relation with the farmers, no matter what they were, British or Polish or whatever. And when the time for threshing came, we were sent out to single to farmers, to stay on the farms.
Well, I felt free, you know, and I took care of the kids, do babysitting, you know. I was a part of the family.
One night there was a knock on the door, and my parents answered it, and it was a prisoner of war who hadn't been to our home before, but he had heard at the camp from the other prisoners that they had a 3-year-old daughter, and since he had one, he wanted to know if he could come in and play with me so he'd know what his little girl was like back in Germany.
The positive reports from the farmers encouraged the Labor Department to use willing German prisoners to fill the manpower shortage in the lumber industry.
Well, it was kind of a natural paradise to us, because we saw the first time black bears and moose and skunks and otters and all kinds of different birds. We don't have it in our country, so that it was a different world for us. So we started work as lumberjacks. We had to make a cord, which is 4 feet by 4 feet by 8 feet, and that was done after a while at noontime, so we had a spare time in the afternoon. And mostly they came in, they made a roll call, going through the cabin, say how many are there, and after a while they came in, hi Jack, hi Bill. How many people are in there? 18, okay. He didn't even count, you know. Everybody on board? Everybody on board. Where to go? Where to escape? It's no use. No road, no nothing around. Where to go?
I never felt any hatred about those guys. And I said, well, they have to do their duty. I did my duty. No reason to hate each other.
Only on the battlefield, the other side was the enemy. But very soon we became acquainted, as I told you, to the conditions, to the new conditions. And we didn't feel the Canadians to be our enemy anymore here, because they were treating us so well, which you didn't expect, you know. When we came here, we thought, oh, another barbed wire, another guarding, another I don't know what else. That didn't happen.
I'm sure that this must have happened, that they just got a new insights about things, because they had been told things about us, you know, that we were nasty people, and this was all part of their education in Germany. Some might call it brainwashing. And when they came here and found that it wasn't the way it was at all, they just totally had to rethink their attitudes.
These forces to lay down their arms and to surrender unconditionally.
May 8, 1945. The war in Europe was finally over. Euphoria for some, bitter disappointment for others.
We stood at attention, and our leader said, Germany has surrendered. You are relieved from your oath. And we took in the flag. And that was the end of it. I could hardly believe that we had been so much betrayed with all kinds of lies. Hitler was insane. He wasn't there anymore at that time, in my opinion. But that we had been betrayed to such an extent that there really were people who till the last day were still fighting. They showed us the movies from the concentration camps, and I was just, I couldn't believe that things like that happened. Because believe it or not, I did not know about extermination. I knew that concentration camps existed, but not that way. And the first time I read about it was in the Reader's Digest probably in May or June 45.
But when we got it later then in 45 with films we saw, we were really shocked because we didn't believe it. We said, that's propaganda. But then they showed it and showed it, and then, well, oh my God, what happened there? Germans couldn't do that. But we had to believe because there were proof of that, lots of proof, evidence, saw films, and that was bad.
We were classified in the A, B, and C, I believe. And the A, those were the people who pulled the old flag down and raised the new flag in a hurry overnight. Then there were the stubborn guys who didn't want to learn from facts, who were still stuck on the old ideas. They were the C. But both groups were not the majority. The majority were the politically indifferent, who were very sorry, and I belonged to them.
Although the war was over, German POWs were held for one more year. The time they'd spent in Canada had caused a change. Many signed up for offered courses on democratic governance, and over 6,000 applied to stay, despite the improbability.
13. August 1945.
August 13th, 1945. My dear parents, still no news from home. I haven't heard from you in 7 months now. I don't know where you are, nor how you are. We heard of the heavy bombing on all of our German cities, and I worry about you greatly. You realize most how much your family means to you when you are in danger of losing them.
By that time, some guys already knew that they had no home anymore to return to. That had lost their families, their homes, from Sudetenland, for example, people. They knew already that they couldn't return home.
Well, we had an uncertain future because nobody knew what would happen in Germany. What could he expect? Could he be in his job? Or when he didn't have any job like us, young guys, could we study, go to university or whatever, get trained? And have we an apartment, have we a house? Because all the towns and cities were bombed. So it was really uncertain. So many didn't really like it to leave.
Many of them were asking me, how do we get to stay here? And I said, well, what do you know about Canada? Why would you want to stay here? All you've ever seen of Canada is what you saw out of the window of the train coming across the country, and looking out through this barbed wire, this very bleak landscape here in Wainwright. I said, oh, we know Canada's a nice country, and Canadians are nice people, and we want to stay here. How do we do that? So I said, well, there's just no way you can do that. You're going to have to go back home and apply like anyone else, and to come here and just join the queue.
The commander from the Canadian side held a goodbye speech, to us. And I remember he said, remember when you're going home, your relations have changed, and you have changed. And this is very true. When you be so long apart, And again, no commander would make a good goodbye speech in any other country. You have to always praise Canada. You did it.
After another year of reparation work in England, they finally, in 1947, arrived back home in Germany. And they could hardly believe what they saw.
And I wanted to see the old parents again, and old places. Well, it was very sad. People were so discouraged and without any hope. Many places that played a role in my upbringing were destroyed. They weren't anymore. The places where I worked, the schools I went to, all these things were destroyed. And my classmates from school, very few returned from them. A class of 30, I think 3 returned, survived the war.
On my train travel from Montreal to Wainwright and back, I saw the big country. Not even thinking about immigrating to Canada at that time. But I saw, gee, there's beauty here. It's not enemy country, it's a country, for Pete's sake, just like any other country with its beauty. And Canada was now my number one choice when I decided out of Germany. I had enough of these wars every 20, 30 years and all these enemies, France on one side, Poland on the other side, and all that. Let's go to Canada.
And I corresponded with the old farmers here in Waldersee, and one of the farmers was ready to sponsor me. Yeah, it took a little while. First, it was only me, and I said, no, I will take a family with me.
And in fact, Germans started coming to Canada in large numbers right after the war, as soon as they could get here. And they seemed to be welcomed, that there was no resentment at all. And I can't imagine that happening, let's say, in Holland or in Poland. So that was the difference. And I think it's because of the fact that the experiences that they had during the war, that the general population's experiences were quite different.
During all those years, my parents wrote sometimes, good that you are in Canadian prisonership. We know that you are treated well.
Who were the enemy? That's a question I've often asked myself. Our enemy was not the German people. It was more the ideology that they were following there, and there was a lot of evil people who were pushing that idea. They realized that following this Nazi ideology, it had brought total catastrophe to their own country, total ruination, and enormous loss of life.
The moment I was captured wasn't pleasant, but it changed my whole life to the better. my whole life. I would have never been in Canada. Yeah, changed my whole life.
Prisoners of war often leave captivity with deep emotional and physical scars. My dad was indeed fortunate to have been a POW in Canada. Perhaps changing an enemy into a friend is the ultimate weapon against war.
Mr. Osterwald.
Yes, I'm very happy to meet you.
You too.
After 56 years, I meet again you.
That's right. The last time we saw each other, we were technically enemies.
And we didn't even know about it.
Separated by barbed wire.
Right.
So now, 56 years later, we can shake hands as friends.
Right, exactly.